I'm not asking if you're okay, because I know even you are uncertain, perhaps on a quiet morning. You glance in the mirror, not to check your hair or adjust your shirt, but simply to look. But what do you see? Not just a face, but something stirring faintly behind your gaze. Or vageflicker, a shadow too elusive to name. It doesn't smile or cry, yet it knows you. And you, distracted, turn away quickly, as if its presence unsettles you. You may not realize it, but that quiet part of you keeps watching, patient. And still, the mirror is an ancient symbol, reflecting not only the body, but glimpses of the soul. In fairy tales, villains can never linger before a mirror, for they fear the truth. But you are no villain. You are simply someone who has grown too accustomed to avoiding your own gaze, and that is worth pausing to consider. I once wrote, "Those who look outward dream, those who look inward awaken." But looking inward doesn't mean closing your eyes. Sometimes it begins with a single, honest look into the mirror's reflection, not to fix anything, but to ask, who is there with me? That reflection, dear friend, is more than just you. It is the part of you that remains unlived. The part you left behind in your effort to fit into life. The shadow doesn't exist outside you. It lives in the mirror, in the forgotten glance, in the echo of fears you haven't named. Try again. Look into the mirror, not as a habit, but as a ritual. Look until you feel uneasy. That unease is a threshold where consciousness meets the unconscious. There, you cease to be a mere observer. You become a listener. Symbolically, the mirror never stays silent. It reflects what you don't wish to see, but that is where the journey begins. No light can be born without first an honest gaze into the darkness. And so, I invite you not to go anywhere, but to step into your own gaze, for there, the shadow waits not to frighten, but to be recognized. Do you remember a time in childhood when you were told to be good, successful, polite, or never angry? Those instructions, sometimes born of love, sometimes of fear, build a tidy house within you, a social self, a persona, but you didn't know that. In the same moment, another figure began to grow in the forest behind that house. That is the one you dare not. Look at the unlived you. That is the shadow. The shadow is not evil. It is simply the part forbidden to speak. The part you were taught should not exist. It is the anger you never expressed, the passion you suppressed, the fear you swallowed. But you cannot destroy the shadow by ignoring it. It doesn't vanish. It retreats into the unconscious. And from there, it begins to steer you like an invisible hand. Have you ever wondered why you explode without knowing why? Why you hurt others and then regret it with a lump in your throat? That is the shadow breaking through, not to destroy, but to be heard. If you keep ignoring it, it will take shape in wild dreams, in psychological symptoms, or more dangerously in a false consciousness, making you live as a copy of yourself. The shadow is a traveler knocking at your door when you least want a guest. If you don't open the door, it will find another way in through your actions, your illnesses, your mistaken choices. I once wrote, the shadow is a path to the light, or you cannot achieve wholeness without reclaiming the parts you've denied. In therapy, I often ask patients, what do you fear most about yourself? When the answer is honest, it always leads to the shadow. A successful man fears his weakness. A gentle woman fears her anger. A monk fears his desire. But these are the parts that need integration, not suppression. You may ask, what do I do with the shadow? The answer is, don't destroy it. Dialogue with it. Don't suppress it. Listen to it. For the shadow is the echo of your soul, a message from the place you've forgotten. In ancient Greek myth, Orpheus descended to the underworld to retrieve Eurydice. His lost love, he failed because he looked back before crossing the threshold of hell. The journey with the shadow is similar. You must go to the end without turning back, without judgment, with only courage and honesty. You don't descend into darkness to die, but to bring back life from the parts of you that have died. Imagine stepping into a forest with no path, no light. Each step is a buried memory. Each branch a repressed emotion. You cannot rush or close your eyes. You must walk deliberately with open eyes and a soft heart. That is the journey of one who dares to face the shadow without fear. And when you go deep enough, the shadow ceases to be an enemy. It becomes a guide, a spiritual hermit leading you to places you never thought you could reach. But you cannot arrive there through compliance, only through honesty with yourself. The shadow is the exiled friend, and now it knocks to return. We often think we live in the light of reason, that our decisions are logical, that we know what we want and who we are. But the unconscious doesn't obey that logic. It is an undercurrent flowing silently beneath the surface of awareness, and sometimes it rises in a dream like a strange mirror reflecting a distorted image of ourselves. I once said that dreams are the voice of God within us, not in a rigid religious sense, but in a profound sacred one. In every bizarre, illogical, or seemingly nonsensical dream lies a symbolic message, a doorway to the world of the shadow. Picture this: you dream of being in a familiar house, but the light is strange. Everything is inverted, and you see yourself staring back from a mirror, but the face in the mirror isn't entirely you. The eyes are too deep, the smile too faint. You shudder not from something evil, but from the eerie sense that I was once that person, or still am, but I dare not admit it. This is no mere strange dream. It is a dialogue with the shadow. The mirror in a dream is one of the oldest symbols of reflection, not just of form, but of essence. In many cultures, mirrors are sacred objects, capable of revealing the true soul or opening doors to other realms. When a dream places you before a mirror, it's not for a casual glance, but to confront what you've avoided. In dream analysis with patients, I often see the shadow appear in many forms: a stranger in a dark basement, a ferocious animal, a crying child, or sometimes the dreamer themselves. But distorted, a man might dream of becoming a monster in a bustling city. A woman might dream of screaming or attacking loved ones. These images terrify them, making them think they're mad, evil, or losing themselves. But this is not destruction. It is the shadow emerging, hoping to be heard. The paradox is this: the shadow doesn't come to destroy, but to redeem. It arrives as a messenger of the soul, carrying the parts of you that were cut off to become good, or redeemed, or perfect. And like all vital messages, It speaks not in words, but in symbols through dreams. In a letter I once wrote, "The shadow is everything a person doesn't recognize about themselves or refuses to acknowledge. In dreams, it takes form. Jealousy becomes a snake. Desire becomes fire. Fear becomes an abyss. The unconscious doesn't speak in human language, it speaks in images. Movement and feeling. To understand the shadow, you cannot approach it with reason alone, but with intuition, receptivity, and sincerity. When you write down a dream, you're not just recording, you're sitting beside the shadow, listening to its story. When you dare to ask, "Why did I dream of killing someone?" you step into the realm where the shadow reigns, not to destroy, but to understand the suppressed anger within. In alchemy, there is a stage called Nigredo, the dark night of the soul, where the sacred material is melted, broken down, returned to chaos. The shadow is the psychological embodiment of Nigredo. When you feel yourself falling apart, no longer yourself. You may be in the first stage of individuation, the journey to become wholly yourself, uncensored. To move forward, you must let the shadow speak. I cannot tell you what your dream means, like a dictionary, but I can ask, what emotions arose when you saw that image? What story echoes from your childhood? Dreams are personal, as is the shadow, yet they belong to the collective eternal, where every soul must face the dark night to see the light. So, when you dream of something frightening, don't turn away. Listen, for it may be the deepest part of you crying out not to destroy, but to live. Keep going, a traveler in the dark. For in the end, you are the one gazing into the mirror of your dreams. When you face the shadow in the mirror, that distorted yet eerily familiar image, something deeper begins, transformation. But this transformation isn't a shimmering miracle. It is a ritual, a struggle between the ego and the forgotten parts of the soul. A silent yet fierce negotiation, like that between Apollo and Prometheus, between the light of reason and the stolen fire from the heavens. I often say the shadow is the soul's twin. When you're unprepared, it is an enemy. When you're courageous, it becomes a guide. To reach that point, you must cross a liminal space where everything collapses to give way to a new inner structure. I've noticed something curious in patients who enter this phase. They no longer fear the shadow as before. Instead, they feel empty, unsteady, disoriented. The old certainties, the familiar patterns are gone, but the new form hasn't yet emerged, like a chrysalis. The body dissolves within the cocoon, awaiting wings. This is the Nigredo of alchemy, the darkest phase where all components break down. In analytical psychology, it is the phase of dissociation, identity crisis, and disorientation. You no longer trust the old images of yourself, the achiever, the strong one, the kind one, but you don't yet know who you are without them. You look in the mirror and it shatters. The fragments fall, each piece carrying a memory, an emotion, a forsaken part of the soul. I recall a patient, a tough, in control leader who came to me in crisis, in a dream. He saw himself as a lost child in a forest, led by a man in black. He panicked, thinking it foretold something ominous. I told him, that is the part of you you've forgotten, the frightened child within being guided by the shadow. And he wept not from fear, but because for the first time. He felt seen. Here is the crux. The shadow is not evil. It is the rejected part of the soul, the forgotten dreams, the unacknowledged anger, the buried passions. When they return, it is not to destroy, but to claim their place in the whole. Individuation, the process of reconciling the ego with the whole of the soul, self, cannot happen without making peace with the shadow. There can be no true light without passing through your own darkness. As in Egyptian myth, the god Ra must traverse the underworld each night to rise at dawn. You might ask, how do I know I'm in this phase? How do I distinguish the shadow from evil? The answer lies within. The shadow, though frightening, always carries a message of healing. It doesn't crave destruction, only recognition. If you feel strange, unlike yourself, if you're prone to anger, doubt, or vivid dreams of pursuers, dark figures, or doppelgangers, you may be entering the shadow's realm. Don't dismiss it. Write down those dreams. Look at the parts you've rejected, emotions, memories, en failure, desires, and ask, what are you here to say? Alchemy teaches that gold is only forged after the material dies once. So too does the soul mature, only when the ego surrenders to give birth to a new being. Not perfect, but whole, not saintly, but truly you. In this journey, the shadow is not an obstacle, but the key holder. Without it, you cannot unlock the door to your soul. Without it, you remain a role, not a living, vibrant human with all their light and darkness. Remember, the shadow doesn't want you to become it. It wants you to become yourself, but a self that rejects no part. And so, the shattered mirror becomes a window. You see, outward and inward at once, no longer a distorted reflection, but a deep, true, and whole gaze. After passing through the darkness, after crumbling under the weight of the soul's mirror, something wondrous begins. Not like lightning splitting the night, but like a distant echo from a sacred mountain, soft, whispering, yet shaking the entire soul. This is when the self, the wholeness of the soul, speaks. The self is not a higher you, not a pure spirituality detached from reality. The self is the entirety of life breathing through you, encompassing the ego, the shadow, the light and the darkness. The self excludes nothing, it embraces all. If the ego is a flickering candle in the night, the self is the night sky holding stars, clouds and silence. I've called the self the living mandala of the soul, a transpersonal center around which the ego orbits. You cannot reach the self through will, reason, or dogma. It doesn't come when summoned, but reveals itself when you surrender most deeply to yourself. Like a lotus rising from mud, the self appears only when you dare to immerse yourself in the mire of the unconscious. A common image is the Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail. It is the ultimate symbol of wholeness. The beginning lies in the end, life in death, light in darkness. Your soul, in the process of individuation, is that Ouroboros spinning not to destroy, but to complete itself. I recall a patient, a young artist, who once attempted suicide, feeling irredeemably empty. After months of therapy, she began painting her dreams. One night, She dreamed of standing before a black mirror that reflected not her face, but an eye, a blazing green eye, staring straight into her. I didn't know who it was, but it knew me to my core, she wrote. That was the self. Not a god out there, but the inner center gazing through the darkness. When you see that eye in the mirror, you no longer merely reflect yourself, you become yourself. The ego doesn't vanish, but it finds its place, a fragment within the vibrant, mysterious whole of the soul. The emergence of the self is both a pinnacle and a beginning. It offers not comfort, but a task. I wrote, the self gives us destiny, not happiness, but meaning. When you touch the self, you realize life is no longer a series of goals, but a sacred journey. Every action, however small, becomes a symbol. Every person you meet becomes an archetype, and you no longer striving to become someone, to begin to remember who you are. The light in the eyes of darkness is a transforming light, not one that burns, but one that transmutes. It is the green flame of alchemy, turning lead into gold, tears into intuition, wounds into a compass. Nothing is rejected, for everything holds meaning, even pain. If you're in this phase, you'll feel an unusual stillness, not emptiness, but a depth-filled silence. Questions no longer rush for answers. You observe yourself as if gazing at a lake, where every ripple whispers from the collective eternal. Remember, the self doesn't come to make you great, but to make you authentic. As I wrote in the Red Book, I lost my way, looking only at the mountain's peak, but my soul waited in the valley. Go down there where the darkness sings and silence has eyes. And now you no longer need a mirror. Your gaze has become the mirror. You no longer fear the darkness, for you have become the light bearer, not to illuminate others, but to walk with them in the night. When the self emerges, when you've touched the blazing eye in the darkness, a deeper question arises. What do I do with this light? Is it only for my inner world, in the mystical realm of dreams, alchemy and contemplation, or does it have a path back to the world? This is where the journey doesn't end, but turns onto a new path. Reintegration. In alchemical tradition, after gold is forged from lead, the alchemist doesn't hoard it, but integrates it into the world healing, sharing, restoring order. Likewise, a soul that has met the self cannot remain sealed. To linger forever in the light of the self risks a spiritual arrogance, a disconnection from the human reality. You might fall into a new illusion. I am awakened, I am enlightened. And like all illusions, it becomes another shadow. I warned in the Red Book, those who enter the soul and do not return become prisoners of their own illusory paradise. And this is a challenging phase I often see in those who journey deeply inward. After meeting the shadow and the self, they resist returning to everyday life. The world, with its bills, arguments, and mundane interactions, feels meaningless. But it is there, in that banality, where true individuation unfolds. Reintegration is bringing the dream symbols into the morning. It's recognizing that anger at a colleague isn't just a bad emotion, but a piece of the shadow yet to be seen. It's understanding that washing dishes can be as sacred as writing in a dream journal. It's seeing a child playing in a park and realizing the animus or anima within them speaks to you. In Greek myth, Orpheus descended to the underworld to save his beloved. He was allowed to bring her back to the world, provided he didn't look back, but he did. And Eurydice vanished. The inner journey is similar if you bring the light back to life without maintaining the rhythm and face of the unconscious. You lose the sacred gift. So return, but not as you were, not as someone extraordinary amid the ordinary, but as one who carries a hidden light in their eyes. No one needs to know how far you've traveled, but you know, and that changes how you see everything. I recall a man who dreamed of standing in a burning city, holding a bowl of clear water. He asked, "Can I extinguish the fire with just this small bowl?" I replied, "Perhaps not, but the way you walk with that bowl will remind others that water still exists." And that is reintegration, not saving the world, but being in it as a living symbol, working, loving, failing, hurting, but with a different depth, no longer fleeing, no longer pulled by the unconscious, but dancing with it. A kind gesture can embody the self. An honest word can be the reconciled shadow's voice. A silent embrace can be the animus, anima loving, without possession. Do you see? The mundane becomes a ritual, and the world once dull is now a new mirror. You've moved from the mirror where the shadow appeared to the blazing eye of the self, and now back as a fire bearer. That light no longer needs to shine, it simply needs to be. Where do we go from here? Nowhere, but to be where you stand, more deeply, more authentically, ready to live, not as a role, but as yourself. Dear friend, now that you've returned to the world with the light reintegrated into your soul, the journey doesn't end, it deepens. The questions grow profound. No longer who am I, but how will I love? How will I wield power? How will I die without betraying my essence? The three ancient symbols, love, power, and death, now emerge as the final gateways to becoming a whole human. I wrote that individuation is not about becoming better, but becoming whole, and wholeness includes eros, logos, and thanatos. Love at the deepest symbolic level is no longer a craving for union, but the allowance of difference to exist within us. When you love, you don't seek the other to complete you, but to reflect your fragmented parts. The beloved becomes a mirror, and once again you see the shadow. But this time you don't flee. You step forward and say, "I see you. I see my fear in your eyes." From there, Eros is no longer a consuming passion, but an open embrace where difference remains intact. And love still smolders, power the most misunderstood symbol. In the unconscious, power is the archetype of logos order, will, form, structure, but without integrating the shadow, power becomes oppression of others and of oneself. Those who have seen the shadow and met the self, if unaware, risk spiritual tyranny. I know the way, I am the light, I warn clearly. Any healer, therapist, religious figure, or philosopher who hasn't integrated power will unconsciously harm others. Death, not an end, but the archetype of rebirth from the Red Book. I wrote, "There must be death for the old, so the new can be born." But the death I speak of here is not biological. It is the daily death of the old ego. When you let go of a role, when you forgive yourself, when you love someone who doesn't return it and still open your heart, you die and are reborn. Love, power, and death, the final symbols, if seen through the light of a reconciled shadow, become the three pillars of a symbolic life. A life not merely lived, but experienced as a ritual, each step, each word, bearing the mark of an awakened unconscious. I once heard a woman dream of entering a strange temple, where the altar held not a god, but an empty throne. She asked, "Why is the throne empty?" I replied, "Because the God is you, but only if you dare to sit with a broken heart." In the throne power, the temple, sacred love, the empty throne, the death of the prideful ego. Now, you can live with a humility. Only those who have died in the unconscious can know you no longer need to be right. You no longer need to be perfect. You don't need anyone to validate your journey, for you have seen, touched, earth, and risen. And the world will feel it not through your words, but through your presence, through eyes that don't judge, through embraces that don't possess, through silence filled with meaning. You are no longer one who passes through the darkness. You are one who carries the darkness within the light. Now, you can create your own mandala, not a beautiful drawing, but your life itself, where every fear, every love, every small death is a sacred piece of the whole